You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 237 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden here with the man himself, Pankaj Bhojwani. As always, this week on the pod, a honest mistake, a change up in the format potentially 2 weeks out from the World Championships, but not class constructed, Pankaj, not class constructed. No changes there, of course, but living legend. So it's, I guess, something has been thrown into the works, into the gears, as it were. But it's not a change to class constructed. There's no limited this World Championships, but it is a big change, or a potential big change, or potentially not a big change at all for living legend, which we'll be talking about in the main topic this week. Pankaj, before we get into all that, I guess, week in flesh and blood, how was it? What did you get up to? What have you been doing?
Yeah, so last week we were wondering what we were going to do this week for the pod, because we discussed a lot last week, which, by the way, was kind of completely irrelevant now, has been made irrelevant. But then we were thinking, what should we do this week? Because next week's going to be our Worlds preview, where we make a lot of predictions and stuff. And LSS handed us a bone here with this emergency BNR, if you will, kind of. I'm using the term emergency here kind of loosely, because there was obviously a BNR scheduled for next week. They just moved it forward 1 week, which... a bit of a spoiler before we get into the main topic, I'm actually very happy about. I'm glad they did this, as I'm sure a lot of the players are, that it was moved forward a week. I think a lot of people were asking for that, and we did get it. So yeah, that's our topic for this week. Awesome. Thanks, LSS, for giving us a topic, because we were lost on what to do. My week in Flesh and Blood has been a little bit light. There wasn't a ProQuest near enough to me for me to go to this past weekend. So mostly just been testing internally with the team, preparing for Battleheart in Tacoma, and also doing some LL investigation, which also kind of got a little bit muted by the bannings, and we're going to need to start reinvestigating. But I would say a bunch of our findings from before that are still relevant, or there's at least a base for us to start on. And it's just been more LL testing, more CC testing in prep for the Battleheart. And what about you?
Yeah, I definitely some testing, mostly class constructed. In fact, basically all class constructed, because Living Legend, I'm not going to be at Worlds either in the booth or playing, so Living Legend is kind of fairly meaningless to me. I won't even get a chance to play it this weekend because I'll be casting the calling, so no playing this coming weekend. So I was interested, and I was playing some games over the last couple of weeks, but just class constructed for me, sort of spending some time getting familiar with matchups that maybe I'm not super familiar with in this current meta. Some of the fringe decks that I think could show up this weekend that I still need some, like for instance, honestly, the new heroes, and I'm seeing some Lyeth and underhanded cheat around. I'm not super familiar with what those decks do, so I've just been watching some games, things like that. But I also played a ProQuest on Sunday. I played a class constructed ProQuest, picked up my Syndra deck. Only deck I've sleeved this season, actually. I had intended to maybe play some Verdance or some Gravy. Haven't been able to get out to as many ProQuests as I would have liked for a few different reasons. So it's only my second ProQuest. Played Syndra again. Feeling pretty good on Syndra, honestly. And went all the way to the finals and lost to a Dash.io in the finals. So we almost got there. But yeah, just in the end got taken out by the IO.
I mean, Dash.io is an unfavored matchup for you, I would say. Question quickly: did you lose the finals, or did you strategically lose the finals? I guess probably because this is close to the last week of ProQuest, maybe that point isn't valid anymore. But I know some people have been strategically losing their finals so that they can play more ProQuests. But I'm guessing if you're this weekend's calling Sydney, and I don't think you have another ProQuest, so you probably didn't do that, huh? Now that I ask it, now that I think about it a little further.
Yeah, I definitely didn't do that. I mean, I think that's stupid. Cool. I don't understand this thought process. Someone asked me on the weekend about the change that LSS made to the ProQuest system and the sort of like getting banned, after you win a ProQuest. And I know we've spoken about this already, but for me, the changes. There's always positives and negatives to these changes. I think overall, though, it's good for the growth of ProQuest, and I mean, just anecdotally, it was exciting to see ProQuest in my area capped out again on the weekend. They allowed more players to come in, which is awesome. So yeah, for me, I definitely didn't lose intentionally. I wish. I mean, when my Dash Eye opponent on turn 0 went Teklo Pounder, Teklo Core pass, I wasn't feeling too good about things. But we actually almost got there, almost got back into it at the end. I had like a top deck opportunity off a throw dagger to potentially, if I ripped a 0 for 4, I think I could have won the game. So it was pretty close, honestly. But yeah.
Interesting that they brought Teklo Pounder in against you. I didn't think that was a card they bring in to Syndra, but maybe if they knew they were going first, they were like just a bit of added equity, I suppose. Coming back to the ProQuest changes, yeah, I'm sort of with you. I currently don't have I still don't have a very strong opinion on it. I believe I mentioned this when we first discussed it as well. I'm with you where there are both positives and negatives to this. But I do want to ask, because I know some high-level players who are confident that they can win a ProQuest later on, have been choosing to strategically lose / concede in the finals for that reason, and I don't really hold it against them for doing that. I think if you're in an area where you have an abundance of ProQuests and you want to go play further just because you want to enjoy the game more, or because you've maybe already booked that travel, or you want to play for those top 8 promos, which are really, really good this season, actually. The Overcrowdeds and the Swing Bigs are pretty awesome promos to try and play for. For any of those reasons, I kind of just don't really hold it against anyone who has chosen to take that path. But yeah, overall, still don't have a strong opinion on the ProQuest changes so far.
Sure, fair enough, yeah.
On to the news, then?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so the news, the big piece of news, really, the BNR announcement dropped early, which is the main topic of this pod, and we'll get more into that in a little bit. But we also want to do a little check-in on the Classic Constructed ProQuest results this past weekend. We have Verdance once again at the top over here. Last week, I believe it was Syndra, correct? Or was it last week as well, Verdance? I don't fully remember. I just know that 3 of them have been doing a bit of musical chairs at the top. And this time it's Verdance back on top.
Verdance has
with
had
Syndra
2
and
weeks.
Gravy.
Yeah, Verdance has had 2 weeks.
Verdance has 2. Okay.
Yeah.
With Syndra and Gravy not too far behind. Verdance with 18 wins, Syndra at 13 wins, and Gravy at 12 wins. Also, it looks like, I think there were about 100 ProQuests, so the percentages are also matching just straight up the number of wins, where Verdance is 18 wins and 18% of the wins, which is just quite interesting. So 3 of them firmly at the top, which is something we've been talking about for weeks. We know that is the state of the game. But in the heroes coming right after it, we've constantly been seeing this flux the past few weeks. Like, we had Florian at some point, like 2 weeks ago, I think. And last week there was KO, Armed and Dangerous. This week we have Kano right there, right after Gravy at 7 wins, and Invicta Goldmane to follow him at 6 wins, perhaps, just feeding on the Syndras, which is really, really interesting. And after we have Acilio, Prism, KO, Florian again, Jarl, and pretty much the rest of the Flesh and Blood roster. There's been so many wins picked up by a whole bunch of heroes, including, shout out Marlin, whoever the players are who have won on Marlin, shout out to you. Honestly, I'm living vicariously through you, pretty much. 2 Marlin wins this week, which I'm very, very happy about. And yeah, that's been the ProQuest results this past week. Do you have any thoughts on that, Hayden?
No, I mean, it's the top 3 continue to just, like you say, rotate around a little bit. They are the 3 best decks in the format. We've kind of solidified that now this whole ProQuest season. We've spent a lot of our time and energy talking about what are those decks that are going to sit on the outside, and also those rotate through as well. And I think by the time we get to the World Championships in 2 weeks' time, and I think this weekend will be a good indicator of that, is that these 3 decks will be the 3 most played decks this coming weekend. There is a slight chance, honestly, that Gravy is not the 3rd most played deck, which is kind of interesting. Not at Worlds. I think Worlds it will solidly be in the top 3. Might even be the 2nd most played deck. I can really see this. But for the calling this weekend, it might not be. It might be 4th most played. I think that Syndra and Verdance, or Syndra at least, is going to be 1 and 2 for this weekend at the calling, and then at the Worlds. So that I think that's pretty solid for me at this point. I'm now interested to see how people react with these fringe decks based on the percentage they expect these top 3 decks to take up in totality, and whether people decide to play Kano, people decide to play Acilio, people decide to play Prism, they decide to play KO. I mean, all in all, though, Kano must be very close to Living Legend at this point, if not basically there.
It's 970 or something like that.
Before this weekend, right? Or is that now?
No, I think it's after the weekend.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
So it's unlikely. It's improbable, but possible that he LLs before Worlds. So I have a question for you. If you think Gravy is going to be potentially not the third most played deck, or potentially the fourth most played deck, who do you think could be third if Gravy isn't the third?
I think people are still, for a calling perspective, I think people are still playing a lot of KO.
That makes sense. And to be honest, I have been hearing a few more rumblings about people being a little bit more inclined towards Prism, which I think does give a little bit more equity to KO as well.
Sure. Yeah. My friend was like, entertaining the prospect about 3 days ago of playing Prism at the calling this weekend, and then we sort of played a couple of games. He played a couple of games. He's like, yeah, no, that's not a good choice.
Were you on Syndra?
I did play Syndra at one point, but also he played into games against Gravy, and now that if the Guardians are playing the Destroy, like the Clash card and things like that, like it's just
Right, that's fair. Because I do feel like the Prism Verdance matchup, since the introduction of Light Up the Leaves, has basically led to quite a loss in the number of poppers on the Verdance side. Because it used to be like red fruits, right, or even yellow fruits, depending on your preference. And there was copies of Summer's Falls as well, whereas now the number of poppers has dropped significantly to the point where it's definitely been felt in that matchup, where I think Prism firmly has edge now, and Verdant simply just doesn't quite have the space to add in those poppers again, or even like multiple copies of Channel the Tranquil Domain, which could potentially help. So that's a good angle. And Syndra's, Syndra's, if they aren't respecting the Prisms, like if I've seen some Syndralists cutting the 7 power poppers, for example, because they want tech into other things, then that becomes quite comfortable for Prism too. And then the Gravy one, I'm still unsure. I hear Prism players tell me they know how to win that matchup, but I can't tell if that's Illusionist Cope or whether the matchup's actually good for her. But yeah, I'm starting to see the angle for Prism, which, like I said earlier, does raise up KO as a potential pick.
I think that's like level 6 thinking you're on there about playing KO, honestly.
Well,
there's not going to be that much Prism to show up.
It's not like KO's matchup into the top 3 decks is horrendous, right? Is
it good?
I don't think he's favored.
No. So why would you play a deck that's not favored into the top 3 decks?
If some people like having an even-ish matchup spread across the field, which I think KO does have.
Some people like having cope. That is true. Some people do like coping. What I would say about the Prism, it's interesting. You said it feels like Verdance is softer to Prism than it was previously, and same with Syndra potentially. I think that is somewhat true. Like people will show up and you choose to use those slots elsewhere. I don't think they, to be honest, from my perspective, I don't think you need to. I think Syndra can easily still play 3 to 4 poppers, up to 5. I think the 5th one you're really starting to have a decision to make. I think on your 5th popper personally, the 4, like for instance, I think often people are looking like, do I play Spellfray leggings or like a 4th popper, for instance? Like I think that's a decision people make. So you're like Kano, Prism, whatever. On the Verdant side, I would think, based on, I guess, at least my testing and the list that I've kind of been playing and enjoying, I like cards like Summer's Fall. Like I think I want access to some number of those potentially, or I actually like some of the value 7 power attacks anyway. So I've not necessarily felt that I've actually felt the matchup better for Verdance, honestly, personally, into Prism than it was, because now you have trees back in, you just have raw damage to punch through, and then you still have roughly around the same number of poppers, maybe 1 or 2 less, but yeah, I don't know. I've actually felt okay in that matchup. I felt better than before.
This discussion has given me an idea. Do you remember last year, before the World Championships, we did a little pseudo deck tech, more like a deck profile of the potential decks that you were going to bring to the World Championships. We went over a Dash.io list that you were considering and an Enigma list that you were considering. Yeah. And we were just sort of discussing the unique additions/omissions that you had made, and those being your 2 options for the World Championships. I'm wondering, should we do the same for this one? Even though you're not playing, I'm curious because you are saying these things about your Syndra lists and your Verdance list, especially having Summer's Fall in it, for example. And I'm kind of like, this would be interesting content. And because you're not even playing, it's not like you're giving anything away either. So I wonder, well, let's discuss that, and maybe that's something we do. And people, let us know in the comments if you want to see something of this. Hayden's, what do you call it? Phantom deck techs, if you will. If he was playing at Worlds, what would he bring?
Well, I thought we could maybe even just preview the top 3 heroes and what the decks could look like and the decisions that people might be looking at for the World Championships. That could be interesting, right? Like this conversation of, are less coalescing to something that might be softer for some of these fringe decks. For instance, what you just spoke about with less poppers and verdants, or Syndra having to make those decisions, or things that might be good for other decks around it as well. So maybe we could just we could actually go a little bit deeper on those top 3 heroes in our preview. Would love to hear what people think though. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, that sounds really cool.
Anything else for the news?
I think that's it.
It's pretty light on Newsweek, right? I mean, we're going to talk BNR announcement, which is the big one of the main topic. So
pretty light in that the part of the news is our entire main topic. But yes.
Sure, exactly. Let's get on to the Commander Cookout. If you want to get your questions in for the Commander Cookout, please do so. You can, as always, drop them in the YouTube comments below. Let us know. It is a Commander Cookout question. You can drop your questions in Spotify as well. We've had a few questions there. You can, in the comments on Spotify, you can email us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com if you're an Arsenal Pass patron. You can go to the patrons Discord and you can drop it in the Commander Cookout section that we've got there. And we have a good question this week. Comes from Burns and says, we've seen LSS print, or Lucky Burns, we've seen LSS print cards to help out one specific class who has had a bad matchup against another class. For example, rolling Fissure for Guardians into Illusionist. Do you think that in an ideal world, they would like to see a floor on the win rate of any given class matchup, as in no class should consistently beat another, say 80+% of the time? And I thought this is a great question because I know exactly where Pankaj is going to go first of all, and he's going to talk about Illusionist. So off you go, Pankaj.
Well, I mean, the question says Illusionist in it already. So
it didn't need to. It didn't need to. You would have gone there anyway.
Also, when it comes to polarized matchups, I think Illusionist is one of the first classes people think of, if not the first. And I don't believe I'm unique in that perspective.
Warrior.
So, to answer this question, I think I'm going to make a distinction here between what I think should be the ideal world and what the question is asking, which is what I think LSS thinks, which is interesting. What I think is that, yes, I'm personally not a big fan of very strong polarizing matchups in the game. Like, I think when a class has multiple, like 80-20s, for example, I'm not a big fan of that. It feels like it gets very gem roulette-y. I'm definitely okay with like favored and unfavored matchups. I think that should exist. That adds a level of dynamicism to the game and a level of attacking the meta at unique angles, because you do have these favored matchups. I think it'll be pretty boring if everyone's 50 into each other. So having favored, but I think when it gets like the 80-90s, that's when it gets a little bit, in my opinion, not ideal. I think I prefer like to be favored if you're somewhere like heavily favored, to be at the max between like 60 to 70%, for example. Now, what I think LSS thinks is, I'm not entirely sure if they see it this way as well. And part of why I feel this way is because I look at some of the quote unquote hate cards that they've printed for some of these polarized matchups, and it does feel like they pull their punches quite a bit. Like, you bring up Roiling Fissure, for example. It's okay. It's not like it did like so much for the Guardian matchup into Illusionist that it's still like you still play Guardian into like an Enigma or something, you're still just losing. Yeah. And I look at cards like Barbed Barrage, for example, comes to mind for me, like from High Seas. It's just not very strong for the ally for Rangers to deal with allies. Barbed Barrage is, for those who don't know, and looks like Hayden doesn't know. It's a one resource 5 power arrow that says you may pay an extra 3 when you attack with it, and it can attack an additional target. So you can, for example, attack the chum that they've activated and still deal damage to face or whatever. But it's still not something you see Marlins even running, because it's a card to me where it's like, okay, let's give them a hate card, but it does feel very much like they've pulled their punches. I feel like if they actually wanted to raise the floor of matchups, they would give some like better hate cards. Like, I would like to see like something like a piercing shot from Ranger, where it's basically an arrow that says any excess damage dealt to the target is dealt to the controller instead, for example. Or like, I look at Cleave on the Warrior side as well. Just another card where I look at it and I was like, wow, it's like they really don't want to give Warriors a proper hate card. Like, why can't Cleave say you can cleave damage from an ally onto the hero instead of just ally onto ally or hero onto ally, right? Like, let them actually have a fighting chance, because these cards, I mean, we saw this happen with Jagged Edge too, like into Enigma, where people are like, oh, this is like, that's a strong hate card. I would say that's in the stronger hate cards that they've printed. But despite it, the matchup is still completely miserable. So I'm like, I feel like I would like to see them give some proper hate cards Like I think about like this piercing shot I just suggested, or a better cleave where you can cleave from an ally onto a hero, which actually makes these board states like a bit of a downside where you can get punished because you've just given them like an easy target of the piercing shot through it and you get like a whole bunch of damage to your face. That would actually add a level of complexity to the matchup and give the underdog class a fighting chance. But because we have seen cards like Jagged Edge not actually even flip the matchup, I don't think it's that scary to give these heroes those tools. That's just my take. So, dude, coming back to answer the question, I'm not entirely sure if I see LSS wanting the floors to be raised too high for these matchups. But hey, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I'm not. So I don't mind semi-polarized matchups. I actually think it makes the game more interesting. I think it makes deck selection more interesting in terms of when you decide to try and understand a metagame and take a risk on something or try and play to a particular angle of a metagame. It's the same reason I like, card selection as well, in terms of, well, I'm just going to give this matchup up because I don't want to spread my deck too thin by potentially trying to play my 3 poppers or something in the sideboard or whatever it might be, right? To change the matchup by 5% or 10%. So I do like some amounts of polarization in the matchup, but I don't like 100-0 or 90-10 matchups, right? I don't mind 80-20s though. That's sort of a realm that I think is really reasonable. To me, that doesn't have anything to do with cards. Like, what did I say cards? I mean, hate cards or silver bullets. I think that's more about just the design of the game and the interaction of how heroes can play into each other. And I do think there is some amount of splash implication. But for instance, what I would say is that, and actually I quite like this, is if you print a bunch of cards that help a particular matchup, so can't prevent damage, things like that, and you need to play, say, 12 cards to change a matchup from a bad matchup to a good matchup. I think that's good. I would much rather have that than silver bullets, because I think if there's a really low cost to putting hate cards in your deck in terms of, I can play 3 of this card and it changes the matchup from a bad matchup to a good matchup, I don't think that's good for the game, because I think that means that if a class becomes, or a hero becomes more popular, then all of a sudden that hero can potentially become unplayable because the opportunity cost of just putting those cards in your deck is so low. Now, the reason that might, for most people, be like, that doesn't happen in this game, is because it's always too illusionist.
No, it does, though. Like, tell that to Warmonger's Diplomacy.
For which matchup?
Ranger.
Which matchup? That's a class. Which matchup?
Right. Okay, well, so back in the day when Azalea was around, if you're a deck that struggles into Azalea, you want to make that matchup better, put 3 Warmongers in. Right now,
I don't think that's a silver bullet, though, that changes that matchup from a bad matchup into a good matchup. That's a card that is, admittedly, I think Warmongers is pushed. That's a card that, and also it's generic, it's a card that is a powerful card in a matchup, right? I think, I grant you, that's probably the closest thing we have to that. I don't necessarily think Warmongers is necessarily that good for the game either, but I don't think that's taking any matchup from a bad matchup into a good matchup. I think that's doing what I'm saying of kind of like, it's changing the percentage. So let's say you have a 30% into Ranger and you're like, right, I'm going to play, or to Azalea, I'm going to play 3 unmovables. I'm going to play 10%. I'm going to play 3 more Mongoose Diplomacy, add an extra 15%. I'm going to play my 3 Fate Foreseen as my extra defense reactions, an extra 5%. Like, that's the kind of thing I think is good for the game of, okay, now all of a sudden you've had to dedicate 9 cards to have a better matchup. Now, granted, Warmongers is the best part of that. I will definitely grant you. That's just a slightly more pushed version of that card. But what I don't want to see in the game is, and I think, honestly, I actually think Jagged Edge could have come close to this if Warriors were better positioned when Enigma was around, of like this one card that just blows everything up, right? Or just completely swings the matchup.
Interesting. I would put Jagged Edge weaker than Warmonger's Diplomacy. Like, in this little paradigm, we're talking about how much one single card would change the percentage. I don't think Jagged Edge, each copy of Jagged Edge added like 5% of the matchup at all.
But I'm not saying it does.
I'll put Jagged Edge.
I'm not saying it does. What I'm saying is, but that's because of, I think that fundamentally Warrior just isn't a good class, so that's fine. But what Warmongers does is something quite different. But I think if Warrior was a better class, or had more powerful sort of, I guess, other cards to help support that, I think Jagged Edge would be kind of busted, honestly.
Interesting. Okay.
Like it would encroach on, or if I also think that Enigma was so powerful that you can just change the way you play a little bit, right? Which is, I will grant you, part of the problem with Illusionist.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that's typically the problem, right? Like these decks do have, like we saw that with Droma, we saw that with Enigma, we saw that with Gravy. People are like, oh yeah, no, I'm super favored into Gravy, and after the Gravies figure out the matchup a little bit, and suddenly you're like, wait, why am I losing this? So I guess I would like to see cards on the level of Jagged Edge when it comes to these tech cards, if you will, or silver bullets. Because the other stuff like Cleave and Barbarage and stuff, in my opinion, is just really pulling the punches. That was the other one. There's that yellow generic buff that gives you an X attack +2, and if it hits, destroy all auras they control or something. I think Hack to Reality, I think is the name. Yeah. And just like stuff like that, I'm just like, man, just come on. Jagged Edge didn't fix Warriors matchup with Enigma. You can print some proper hate cards, and it probably will just make the matchup playable rather than.
I would say make Warrior playable first.
Fair.
Make Warrior playable. Come on, give some people some playable Warrior. I just think they should be really wary of silver bullet cards. I think printing cards that allow you to add into your deck and progressively sort of help you create a better matchup. I think you should be able to, if you want to, put all your resources into a particular matchup and be able to make it a 60%, for instance. I think that is a good thing. I don't think you should be able to make it a 70 or an 80, but I think to make it a 60%. But I don't think that. I don't know if we've got all the card pool for all heroes to do that at this point in time. And there's also this thing about anti-synergy, for instance, like rolling fissure. Like, is that, and how does Victor play a card like that, for instance? Again, we talked about this last week, but then you're clashing. It's a card that doesn't work into that. So there's also anti-synergy in some of these cards. Even Ranger, I would say as well, right? Of like, if you have to play this arrow or you have to play this particular buff, does it work with your other buffs and your other arrows? Possibly not. I think Barbarage is actually kind of an interesting card, though.
I do think it's interesting. I have played around with it, and I haven't been... How do I say it? I haven't been fully disappointed with it. I think there are some cool things you can do it. I think it probably warrants a little bit more exploration, but I do wish there were just a few better answers. Because, on like the Gravy side, for example, we see them come up with... What's that latest ally from Super Slam? I forget what the guy is called, but he basically prevents on hits for the entire turn.
Oh yeah,
and I'm like, that to me is like, okay, that's a hate card. That's like, if like Dory shows up and is giving you serious problems and you want to attack against that matchup, you put 3 of that guy in, and now you have an actual hate card, a card that's actually impactful, a card that hits the field, and you feel like you actually got an equity in the matchup. You've actually changed the percentage, like as you're talking about, where to a point where it feels like it warrants the slots. Whereas I'd feel like sometimes the other classes don't quite get tech cards on that same level. Or rather, other classes should start getting those. And maybe this is an indication that we are maybe moving towards having more proper tech cards like that. But I do want to ask you, I guess, so the question specifically asks, do you think, I guess, LSS wants the floor of a given matchup to be higher than, like, say, like 20%? What are your thoughts on that, I suppose?
Yes and no. Yes, but
where do you think they are?
Depending on the makeup of the individual deck. I think they want people to be able to, and I don't even think they've said this. They want people to be able to cater the style of their hero and the way they play it to be able to have to be able to play games into the other classes and heroes. I think just on your point about Gallo, end of the line is what their hero is called, by the way.
Yes,
I think
yes, that guy.
I think that is. I think Jagged Edge, for instance, is a much more impactful card than that is. But I do think we are starting to see some more of these cards that fit into... So what I'd say that both Gallo and Jagged Edge are cards that fit more into the traditional play style of that hero, and are also cards that have specific interactions into other heroes. For instance, I think we've had cards in the past that just do not fit into what the heroes want to do or their play style, and to actually play them is a massive cost, and it takes away from the synergy and the way that you want your deck to play. And I think those cards are... They're not the sort of cards I want to see. I want to see these ones that are more synergistic with the hero overall.
Actually, that reminds me. Guardian Mastery Pack Guardian. Mm-hmm. I think I said it right this time. Actually did showcase some of this. So yeah, definitely have to give them props on that front. Clash of Bravado, I think, immediately comes to mind.
Yes.
You're talking about like how does Victor play something like this, right? Clash of Bravado, solid hate card for the Illusionist thing. It plays exactly into what Victor wants to do. It's a clash on it. It's also a popper.
Yes.
And it destroys an aura, which is something that
this is what I was talking about
struggles
before.
With. So yeah, so cards like that. Yes, give us more hate cards like that. I'm a big fan of that.
But do you know the problem?
So yeah, I guess to your point, maybe they are shifting towards raising the floors of these matchups.
I think so, but for instance, on that card, the reason it took ages to think about that card is because make Guardian playable first. The same conversation with Warrior. Make Warrior playable first.
Well, I could see, like, for example, Gravy right now in the CC meta is the sort of counterweight to Verdance, right?
Yeah.
Verdance has, frankly, a kind of potentially problematic matchup spread, right? She's favored into a lot of things. Kind of the only thing she's unfavored into is Gravy. Like, he's sort of like the counterweight to her. Mm-hmm. And I'm just imagining, like, if suppose the counterweight to Verdance, say it wasn't Gravy in some sort of alternate universe, it was an aura-based illusionist instead, then you could see Victor actually totally have a spot in this meta game. Like, to your point about make Guardian good, like, it could just be if it wasn't Gravy, but it was an aura-based illusionist, then maybe Victor could have done. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's just Cope as well.
I agree.
I don't know.
I think if Prism was if Prism took Gravy's spot right now, I think
for sure.
That's amazing, right? Like,
then Victor is pogging.
Yeah, I think it's just a symptom of the board presence deck that is good right now. Is it's a bit of aggro decks, but it's worse for some of these big attack decks, right? That's just kind of the way it is. There's some other cards I think that also come to mind. I was just thinking about in this current meta, just now riffing off of this of like Art of Dragon Scale. I think is a card that's interesting and people that
that's a cool one.
Yeah. So there is other cards I think out there that play into the play style. The very and adding extra. It's like, okay, I have those three. I have another 3 cards that are good in this matchup. I have another 3 cards that are good in this matchup. All of a sudden, I think you can swing 5 to 10% into matchups, and I think that is good for the game.
So I'll push back a little bit on Art of Dragon Scale. I don't think that's in the category of, hey, I have this unfavored matchup. Let me add this to like make it a little bit better. I think that's more of just a card that's strong right now in the current meta because you can hit like Striders with it. You can hit the opposing Flick Knives with it. Like if you ask me a card for Syndra that can improve some of her like a 2080 matchup, I'd be like, give her something to play against Guardian, right? Because you play Victor into Syndra and it just feels like you're bullying someone sometimes. So it's like, and Art of Dragon, I don't really think she has a tool for that, for example. And Art of Dragon Scale to me is more in the category of, hey, in this meta, this card's kind of good, but not it fixes my bad matchup or improves my bad matchup by a significant percentage. It just gives me an edge in like the mirror and into Verdance, for example.
Sure. I guess I'm not saying specifically for polarized matchups. I'm just talking in general. Like you can add these cards to target a specific matchup or target a range of matchups. It's like, okay, in the last meta, my Slippy matchup was not good. How about 3 of the target Arachne card? I'll play 3 of the Hunt card. Like I'll add these 6 cards.
That was really cool.
Yeah.
Hunt to the Ends of Wraith showing up last meta was so cool, I think.
Yeah. Just things like this. So no, I agree. I mean, in terms of what for a Syndra we're doing, I don't think every class and every hero has these sorts of build upon cards. But at the end of the day, I think for instance, Syndra's matchup into Guardian is not an 80. It's not a 20%er. I think it's more like a 30 to 40%er, depending on which.
Yeah, it's probably fine actually. Yeah, she probably just doesn't need a tool for that.
It's interesting,
but not Warmongers, please.
Yeah,
except not Warmongers. Like not more of that kind of card. Just because it's also just so unfun on the other side.
Well, it's just a catch-all card, right? It's generic. It's blue. It blocks 3. So it's like I think you were speaking about Clash of Bravado. It's a yellow. It's a Guardian card. It costs 4. Like it's more specific. Jagged Edge. It plays into the synergy, but it's more specific. So yeah, very much so.
Cool.
Well, good question. Good conversation. We'll see what Alex has continued to do with some of this design space. I think as we get more classes, more heroes, it's obviously quite interesting in terms of how this plays out as well. So if you want to get your questions in for Command & Cookout, please do so. As you said, YouTube comments, Spotify comments, send us an email, arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. We didn't say write us a bit of a note, but both Pankaj and I will be at events this weekend. So I'll be at the Calling Sydney casting. Pankaj will be playing at Tacoma at the Battle Hardened there. So if you want to drop us a handwritten note with your name and your question on it, please do so. With that said, let's get into the main topic of the pod and talk about what this ban announcement means for Living Legend and moving beyond. And first of all, if you haven't seen the announcement, Living Legend changes as effective from yesterday. Yesterday in my time zone as we record, but by the time you hear this, it'll be well and truly effective about 3 or 4 days ago, depending on where you're listening from. Deadwood Dirge is back to being restricted after being unrestricted, and Rosetta Thorn is banned. I want to talk a little bit first, Pankaj, before we get into all the, I guess, the nuts and bolts of what that means and what the future is for Living Legend, all these things. Let's first talk about the announcement that came alongside this. So this announcement was pulled forward by a week. Initially, it would be the week before Worlds. It has been shared 2 weeks before Worlds, which I know you spoke about at the start of the pod. I think a good thing to have happen in terms of giving players, listening to players that if there was a change coming, they wanted to have it earlier rather than later for those playing at Worlds and associated battle hardens, things like that. So great to hear that LSS is listening to people. In terms of this article and this announcement, they really go into the fact of that and I'll quote, the run-up to Living Legend's first appearance at Worlds has not been particularly well executed. So LSS is holding up their hands and saying, yes, they understand that the Living Legend format is not to the level that it should be in terms of expectations. The execution of the events that had happened around it was something that was cited in particular in terms of, you spoke about last week, right? The announcement of Living Legend at Worlds came after all the stores decided whether to have Classic Constructor or Living Legend for ProQuest Season Yokohama. So things like this have been cited as, not being executed to the fullest, and then they go into just how strong Runeblade is right now and the reasons for Deadwood Dirge. And they've also been quite transparent again of they wanted to unrestrict Deadwood Dirge so that the Armory deck Viserai was playable out of the box. They've admitted that was not quite the right decision. And then Rosetta Thorn and the power that it has. So yeah, that's the gist of the article. You can go read it on fabtg.com. But I guess just, Pankaj, your sort of thoughts and reactions when you read this article.
So real quick on that point that you just brought up, I'm not sure whether I actually mentioned it on the pod or whether it was something we were discussing before or after, or it might have been in the pre-show pod. So I will just reiterate in case people missed it. When stores were deciding whether to run LL or CC ProQuest for this past season, I believe so. This was something that I think was in one of our comments.
It's true.
A store owner told us that they were asked to make that decision, but at the time when they were making the decision, they did not know yet that LL was going to be featured at Worlds. And so naturally, a lot of stores decided to just run CC. And then we're sort of in this position now where everyone's been talking about the lack of data and the lack of LL ProQuests that's been happening for people to both prepare and, just get information on. So I think that's part of what this article is talking about when it talks about the process not being particularly well executed. I do also want to talk about the next sentence, or at least quote the next sentence, because I do think it's important, which is, I'll take this opportunity, this is the article speaking, I'll take this opportunity to apologize to our players and assure you that we are already in the midst of adjusting our processes to avoid similar situations in the future. So it's just more of them taking accountability and being apologetic and saying sorry for this thing, which I do appreciate. I do think it should be shouted out. We've talked about this time and time again. LSS is a company that isn't afraid to take risks when, to potentially add more enjoyment to the game. And we have seen risks pay off, but sometimes they will not pay off, or sometimes they're not fully well executed, like in this case. But that doesn't mean we should berate them for taking the risk in the first place, I suppose. So I do appreciate that they did acknowledge that and apologizing. So thoughts on the BNR? Well, firstly, I'm glad that it came out.
Before that, I guess.
Yeah, sorry. Go on.
Just to riff on that and just talk about this article a little bit, and just going back to, before we get into the impacts of the ban, just talk about Living Legend a little bit more and things like this. I think it is, as you say, great that they hold up their hands and admit the mistake. I think what's really key is what they learn from this in terms of next year and events next year. For instance, I think one thing that stands out to me is foresight and looking far enough ahead in terms of if they knew in the development cycle that they didn't feel that Super Slam was maybe the right limited format to have at Worlds, or they wanted to showcase a second constructor format, whether that be Living Legend, whether it been Blitz, whether it been Silver Age, whatever it was, depending on what they wanted to support and what they knew was going to be strong based on their design cycle. So if they're not going to play limited at Super Slam limited for Worlds, they should have known that quite some time ago, I think, and known that they wanted to then support this format in the form of, in this instance, Living Legend. So I just think there's a bit of a looking ahead far enough thing. And they spoke about events. It really feels to me like there's a thing around organized play and how they're lining up with organized play and having the right events at the right time to support this, because there's not been enough support events for Living Legend. Which has then meant there's not been enough data and adjustments to the format in a timely manner, because there's just not much to go off. So it's been a little bit just, we spoke about this, a 32-person battle hardened. My ProQuest here locally on Saturday was 9 players, and then it was every other one has been capped except for like it's like in terms of it's sold out, except for this one on Saturday that was 9 players, where the player got a bye and 3 losses and won the event afterwards. Which is insane. But anyway, I think that's just something that, I think needs to be looked at. And Silver Age is on the way. And we spoke last week about, could Silver Age be the next format that's supported in terms of, could we see a Pro Tour with Silver Age next year? And I think it just needs to be handled in the complete opposite way to how Living Legend was. And to be fair, I think it seems like lessons have learned, because we've got 3 Battle Hardens before the end of the year for Silver Age. We have no announcements for next year in terms of what Silver Age will look like at this standpoint. It seems like they're taking their time more with Silver Age, which feels, to me, to be a lot better.
Yeah. To be clear, I'm not defending this whole process leading up to LL being at Worlds. I think I mentioned at the start already, like when they announced it, I was like, apprehensive was, I believe, the term I used.
I think we all were.
But I'm not entirely sure whether they'll be able to execute this well. So I'm not really defending that. I'm just saying there's a little bit of sympathy to be had. And sure. I do appreciate that they have
honesty
apologized.
Is great.
Regarding the Silver Age thing, again, though, I'm wondering, like you're talking about them taking it slowly, if we're expected to see this at like a Pro Tour at sometime next year, I actually feel like, I think a problem with the LL thing was they were actually too slow with it, right? Mm-hmm. There weren't enough events.
Yep.
Stores weren't informed early on enough when they were deciding what to host, what sort of format to run for the PQs. They weren't told early enough that World's going to have LL for them to make that decision. I just hope that if Silver Age is potentially going to be there at Pro Tour 1 or 2 next year, that we should be starting to hear about that right now. Otherwise, we might end up in just the same situation number 2. So I do hope that we don't just repeat the same mistake, because it's like, it's like I think it's pretty forgivable when you like make the mistake the first time, but if it happens again, then I'm going to be like, wait, I thought we learned from this.
This is not I guess this specific mistake, but is maybe the first time, but mistakes like it's not necessarily the first time. But they have learned from things about the ban restricted, for instance, which has been great. So I my feeling is we don't get Silver Age first half of next year, but in terms of a Pro Tour or anything. But I think to your point, it needs to be handled correctly and in a timely manner.
So thoughts? Yep.
Well, I have one other question before we get into the specific thoughts of the ban restricted. Is, does Living Legend have a future as a format?
Yeah. So I think that comes back to the overall, like, I think tone of the article too, where it does feel like they are potentially reconsidering Living Legend's place as it currently stands. And this is something I've been feeling for quite a while as well. Last week or 2 weeks ago, I mentioned how LL feels a little bit of a forced format, where it feels a little bit like there's no organic churn within it, because new product doesn't support LL, because it would be nuts if new product can come in and support LL, like in a significant way, right? Beyond just, hey, okay, Briar, you get to play Regrowth Shock in LL. No, not like into like significant churn, like a new hero coming into it or something. Feels like it's a tough ask, because then you get an MST level set in like CC. And at the same time, nothing is rotating out. There's no Living Legend system within the LL format. So the top decks just stay the top decks because they don't leave. And so the only churn that we get is from bans, which feels very forced. It feels very LSS telling us you don't get to play Ira, you should be playing Starvo, you should be playing this version of Chain, not that version of Chain. You shouldn't be playing Icelander, things like that. You shouldn't be playing Oldhim, I think is probably a big one. And so that's one aspect. But the other aspect I've been thinking about, especially as they have decided to make it a top-tier competitive format and are looking to balance it with bans and stuff, I'm just not entirely sure what the vision for the format is anymore. In that it started off being like, hey, this is a bit of a no-holds-barred sort of format. Go play whatever you want. Yeah. It's all fun and games. It's wild. Go out of or blow your people up. Go Starvo, fuse them until they're miserable or whatever. Not meant to be taken very seriously. Not meant to be taken very seriously was, I think, the initial pitch maybe. Or at least that's maybe what I took away from it. And then now, as it becomes more premier, I'm just like, what's the goal now? Because we're past the point where you are allowed to just go do every degenerate thing that you've done before in CC, right? We're past it. If that was the case, Starvo would still have all his cripplings and all his Okanolds and just like everything. And Rosetta would have been banned. Needles would still be here. All this sort of stuff, right? So I think we're past that. And then my question is this then just CC plus? Like, is that the goal eventually, where you have this relatively balanced power level format and people are playing? But then, like, do people really want that? And I think that's part of. I don't think this article mentions it explicitly, but something that I took away from it was I think they potentially are questioning that as well, where have they maybe moved too far from the original pitch of LL, and now maybe they're in this space where it's like this is kind of turning into CC+, but that's maybe not what they want. And so to your question about does LL have a future, I think these are all the questions I have for it, where it feels like it's turning to CC+. I'm not sure if that's the future that they envisioned for it. I'm not sure if that's where we're going to go. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being reverting back to like this is just a for fun format and we don't expect to have it at a competitive level anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think they need to go back to the drawing board. In terms of it just might not be the right time for Living Legend as well. Like, Living Legend might be, to me, in some ways, Class Constructed could become the Living Legend format in the future. You know what I mean? In terms of as this game progresses and Flesh and Blood evolves and we go through the stages of what this game looks like. I don't know if Living Legend is the format that, I mean, it's just not the format people want to play right now in its current form. So it needs some sort of revamp. In terms of the ban piece that you spoke about, I mean, I played other games where these sorts of formats, whether it be Legacy and Magic, things like that, they have good ban lists. Like, they have reasonably extensive ban lists. I'm kind of okay with it. The problem is obviously you get the splash damage to your point of, you basically can't play Oldhim because we have to control this for another deck. I think there is some creative ways they can work around that. I know we had some people commenting last week about hero-specific bans and things like that. I do think that Living Legend could work pretty close to its current iteration. I just think you need to make some changes to how banning and restricting cards works.
Yeah, I think there should be a plan for change within the format that's not bans. So I guess the hero-specific bans, I think, could potentially be a way forward. Something else that we actually discussed a few weeks ago was the idea of, like, seasons, for example. Okay, actually, we discussed this in the context of CC. Remember when we were talking about what if there's a format that's, like, Welcome to Wraith themed?
Oh, sure, yeah.
And in that format, you can only play WTR heavy hitters and Super Slam, for example. Or, like, a Tales of Aria themed format where all you can play is Tales of Aria and Rosetta and whatever the next TOA set is, for example. Something like that for LL, I think, could be interesting, where it actually goes through seasons. So while it is still it doesn't fully solve the force format feel I was talking about, but it does make it feel like there's churn in a way that's intentional, rather than currently where it kind of just feels like we're sitting here playing the game and then they're like, whoops, we didn't realize Needles was too strong, we're taking it away now. Oh, whoops, we didn't realize Dirge was bad to unrestrict, we're taking it away now. It just feels like the vision's a little bit lost, I guess. And something like the season thing or hero-specific bans can perhaps bring the vision back and kind of let people know this is what the format's like meant to be. Because I think a lot of people, I've been hearing a lot of conversation, people being like, is this meant to be CC+? Like, what is, is this meant to be where we get to do the full degenerate stuff? Like, who's to know?
I think that's a result, in terms of you spoke about it feels like a whoops this, whoops that. To me, that's just a result of not the right resources into testing this format. You know, they're focused on CC, they're focused on future set development, they're focused on Silver Age, and so that to me is just an outcome of that, unfortunately. So,
and the lack of data.
Yeah, but I think they could fix that if they wanted to. It's just going to take a lot of resource and effort. So we'll see. See. I mean, I think what's going to be interesting is that we've had a shake-up, so players need to make some decisions before Worlds. I won't lie, I'm not super excited about watching Living Legend I'm looking forward to watching Living Legend for Worlds. I wouldn't actually be super excited about testing because you've kind of had to adapt to these two recent changes, and they're actually, to me, in the grand scheme of things, pretty minimal changes. I think if I was in a testing process right now, my question would be, okay, so I thought these decks were the best decks in the format. Let's say it's the Rune Blades, it's the Starvo, maybe there's something else in there, and then you're like, right. Effectively, your process just becomes how much of these bans change that perception, as opposed to, right, there's a new angle to this format. I'm not sure that I did with Dirge restriction and Rosetta ban. I don't think changes the angle to the format entirely, or at all, to be honest.
Right, but I get what you're saying from an overarching perspective. It still feels like Runeblades and Starvo are probably at the top. I will push back on the bans feeling minimal. I do think when it comes to specifics, especially when it comes to some people who are potentially already planning to bring a certain deck, some of them have been hit quite hard. Like the Needles ban basically means anyone who's thinking of Ira.
Oh, I'm not sorry. I'm talking about this one here.
Had to fully drop that.
I'm talking about this ban here, though. I'm not talking about the last
at least
ban.
like the past two, because of the previous one was. But okay, but this one too also has that. I think RuneGate Chain is dead in the water. I think RuneGate Chain is now stone cold unplayable, and so people who are thinking of bringing that do need to find a pivot. So while I agree with you that yes, and the overarching texture of the format still feels Runeblade Starvo dominant, I do think the impact is more significant than that statement would imply, because there is one deck at least that is fully unplayable, and I think that does like fully become unplayable from that, and I think that does make it significant.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I agree that it makes it significant. I just think it just makes it a slightly different texture. Like it's the same thing. It's like oh, it's still a chocolate cake. It's just got a slightly different icing on it. I don't know.
Well, I guess I'm looking at it from a perspective of a player who was thinking of bringing RuneGate Chain, right? Of which there were several. I mean, literally the last the Battle Harden that was won by Bird Cabrera, right? Was she won it on Chain on RuneGate Chain, and like. There have been like a bunch of ProQuests that have been like being won by Chain. Wait, this past weekend, we didn't really talk about LL ProQuest results because that was pre-BNR, so we didn't really feel like there was much point. But half of those ProQuests were won by Chain. I wouldn't be surprised if a fairly significant chunk of them were won by RuneGate Chain. I think when I look at it from that perspective, from a perspective of a player, especially a player who was thinking of bringing this and has been practicing it, I would say it's a significant change.
I agree. It has significant impact to players preparing in terms of what they have to do and how they have to adapt. I don't think it has impact to the format, though, is what I'm saying. I think it just looks the same.
I get. Oh, I suppose. Okay, I think I get what you're saying over here. Yeah, and I think we might be just defining impact differently over here. And I think because I agree with your point too. I definitely agree with you that the overall texture of the format is still very similar.
It's just a different. It's just like. You sip that first mouthful of the drink that you just ordered and you're like, is that Pepsi Max and not Coke Zero? And someone's like, I think it might be. Anyway.
Right. I think we're just defining impact differently. Because
I guess your perspective is coming from a player preparing for the event perspective, and my perspective was just the format itself and what the format looks like and how the format feels. Mm-hmm. I agree. If you'd been locked into a deck 3 weeks before Worlds, which... Congratulations! I've never been in that situation before. Then I think that definitely changes the context for you if you were playing that hero. I mean, quite a lot, right? You have to pick a new hero effectively. Probably. Maybe, exactly. Maybe not. Maybe you don't. Maybe you try and make it work.
And speaking of that, the few weeks before Worlds, I think it's probably we can go ahead and talk about the confirmation that there will be no more changes before Worlds. They have effectively moved forward the original announcement, which is going to be 3rd November, I believe. Yep. And they moved it forward to yesterday, I guess,
28th
at the time of this recording. So October 28th. Yeah, which big W. I mean, people were asking for that. People were already, me included, were already a little bit shocked the first time we read that the next BNR was going to happen like 10 days before Worlds. So the fact that it brought it forward, big W. Again, my opinion, we shouldn't have been in this position to begin with. Again, goes back to like some stuff like, haven't we learned from this before that we shouldn't have BNRs this close to Tier 4 events? Like, I thought we had learned from it, but regardless, glad that they brought it forward. Also very appreciative of the fact that they have declared there will be no more changes, that the 3rd November is not happening. These other formats, LL and CC, happening for Worlds. And I think that is very, very helpful for the players, and I'm glad for that.
Yeah, no, I agree. So funny you said, haven't we learned the lesson about having BNRs too close to Tier 4 events? And I agree on that. There's been some there's been some big changes 2 weeks, week before these events before. The funny thing is that, and I don't want to get into it, but the funny thing is like you look at how, I guess, the philosophy of more frequent or the ability to more frequently touch things with bans has been a bit more of a philosophy over the last 9 months or so, like we've spoken about on pods previously. I know we've gotten into that big discussion before. It's just funny that those could sit at odds with each other. It's almost like you want because in CC right now, I think it was obvious there was going to be no touches to CC right? They were not going to touch it. Like the format is just in such a good spot. So it's almost like there wasn't really a CC ban announcement. There was no chance of a CC ban announcement coming. But when a format is not great, go on.
I was going to say, I think if the window between the scheduled BNR and Worlds was wider, I could see a world where they nerf Verdance slightly. I think given that we were expecting the BNR to just be 10 days before Worlds, I'm with you that, I could not see them making CC changes because it was that close. But I could, given like the state of the game right now, if someone tells me they're going to like just give the Verdance a slap on the wrist, that wouldn't be surprising to me. So to your point about there wouldn't be any CC changes, I think that's partly also because of the date of the BNR. Where it's because it's that near. If it were a month away from Worlds, I could totally see them being like, you know what, we're banning Mental Block. Or maybe we're taking away Blue Autumn's touch or something. I don't know. Just a light touch on the wrist for Verdance. But yes, given that we already had the date, I was with you. I was like, I don't think they're making CC changes. The format isn't degenerate enough or like unhealthy enough for them to warrant it.
Okay. Sure.
But carry on.
I can't remember what I was going to say, to be honest.
Sorry, my bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess, there's potential to be at odds with ban restricted announcement timings when you place them. It's a delicate balancing act. There you go. That's the long and the short of it. Yeah. Let's move on. What do you want to talk about?
That's fair. I guess let's talk about the meta then,
sure.
Which we tried to talk about last week. I mean, we did talk about last week, but things have changed. So let's start with the Runeblades, right? I mean, these BNRs directly affect the Runeblades. Deadwood Dirge, Rosetta Thorn, only Runeblade cards. So let's start with Briar, where Briar wasn't running Deadwood Dirge, so Briar effectively is only affected by the Rosetta Thorn ban, which feels like if people still want to play Briar, you would switch to Reaping Blade. Which is just, it's -1 damage on most turn cycles, which is not insignificant. But in my opinion, Briar was already sort of not the best Runeblade. So I don't fully think this really... I feel like it just pushes her down further from not the best Runeblade to why are you bringing Briar. Although actually, to be fair, I actually think she might be better than Chain now because I think Chain got hit quite hard. But yeah, overall, not too sure how this is going to actually impact the texture of the format. I'm kind of just like, cool.
It's so interesting you said 1 damage on most turn cycles. Is that a big impact? I mean, I think it's a lot. To me, it's a lot more than that. Like the split damage aspect in terms of what that means for having dealt arcane damage specifically for those criteria of dealing arcane
creepers.
Damage. I think is pretty massive. And even if it was 2 and 1, like if Reaping Blade did 2 and 1, I think that would be significantly better than what Reaping Blade offers you. So I think it's huge. Honestly, I think it's massive, and I already think Briar was fine. I think it was the third best. I think I do think this is a reasonable downgrade, which is interesting to me actually, because if all the Runeblades all of a sudden became pretty significantly nerfed, other than what that means for Starvo, which I don't necessarily love, I'm like, what other decks become potentially playable because of that? Like, especially when you take away split damage, all of a sudden I'm like, isn't it Illusionist, right? Does that start to become more appealing if you've taken away split damage from a weapon? So that's kind of my initial thoughts.
I think Starvo does get a big bump from this. But yeah, should we discuss the other Runeblades first?
Yeah.
So Chain, I think Chain is dead. Just RuneGate Chain doesn't work with just 1 dirge, I think. It's just very, very difficult to do what you want to do. And Boomer Chain, I think, died last BNR when 3 Warmongers came back into the format. I think Boomer Chain is very vulnerable to that card. I think with 3 Warmongers, if the opponent has 3 Warmongers, they have a relatively straightforward game plan where they play defensive until you're at, like, say, 5 Soul Shackles, and just try and back-to-back Warmongers you and have you die to your own Blood Debt. It's kind of a very replicable, straightforward game plan that everyone has access to with the 3 Warmongers. So I think Boomer Chain was already dead, and with the Dirge being restricted, I think RuneGate Chain is fully dead. So I guess in terms of changes to the form, which is why I was talking about the ban still kind of being kind of significant, where it's like, yeah, sure, Runeblade and Starvo is still the texture, but the Runeblade is kind of solidly just Viscerai now, whereas previously it was like Viscerai and Chain, smattering of Barrier. But yeah, I think Chain is kind of dead in the water.
Just remembered that when when Living Legend got first announced, and I think I put a deck check out, or at least I was talking about like a RuneGate chain kind of build. People are like, that's so bad. I just remembered that now. Anyway, RuneGate chain is.
You showed them.
Bad. Well, no, it's
exactly.
Now it's terrible. I also agree on
now.
I agree on the more original kind of old school chain, boomer chain, whatever you want to call it. I think it's just a bit too slow, and it's just I think it's so. Even if I think the Warmonger is obviously significant, but the format slows down a little bit, so it's like because of I think Briar and Chain's hits. It's like, oh, could you play like more of an original chain? But I think just the speed of that deck combined with the Warmongers is just it's a bit too much for it, unfortunately.
So moving on to Viserai then, definitely nerfed from best deck in format. I think I mentioned last week that he was kind of where everyone should be beginning the testing, where it's like if you're bringing anything other than Viserai, he needs to be like your benchmark to be like, can you play a game into this deck? Because he was sort of shaking him to be kind of sort of uncontested best deck in format. And I think he's nerfed from that. Whereas both the Thorn and Dirge hit him. So I think he's not at that level now, but I think he is still very, very strong. It definitely warrants further exploration. I can't say the team has done all the testing that's probably required, like post bans, but just based on the strong thing that he was doing before, the strongest thing was about Skeletor, right? Mm-hmm. Like that was the main thing that the deck was going for it, and that is still very much present. Dirge affects how quickly or how well he can power that up, but I could see some changes. I know some people are already thinking about Blessing of the Occult, for example, with Sonata Galaxia, which does tax the deck building quite a bit, because those are different game plans now. Whereas Dirge was sort of something that you could slot into both when they're comboing or when they're aggroing, tempoing, or in the same 60 even. They get a pivot between the two because of Dirge. So they're going to need to find a replacement for that. But I still think the raw power of Skeletor is so high that he's still very much going to be a contender.
Yeah. I think Viserai is still best deck in format. I think that it just lost its worst matchup in RuneGate Chain from the format, and I agree that the Dirge hit is like it's you lose two pretty significant cards, but I don't think it's the be all and end all, and it's not and also the Rosetta Thorn I just don't think you care about. So I think it's still best deck in format.
That's actually a great point. Like this Dirge restriction it's minus 2 cards.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of what it is. Like in the main deck, and unlike Briar, Viserai, like to your point, isn't swinging Thorn every turn. There was so many turns where Viserai just isn't swinging Thorn, especially on like the pop of Skeletor turn. There's plenty of times where it's just like he has Ninth Blade, Creepers in something else, and do a couple more attacks. And if that ends on like a Reaping Blade instead of a Thorn, it's kind of like whatever. So because a lot of times there's so many times we're just setting up rune chance, so they're not getting Thorn value anyway, or they're just sending like a big Ninth Blade or something, so it doesn't get affected.
Yeah, cool. Anything else you want to talk about from a Rune Blade perspective? I mean, I think Chain is, to your point, is now maybe tier 3 at best in terms of like it's fringe playable maybe, and it's probably maybe it's tier 2 actually, honestly, in like an original Chain form, but people still can play Warmongers because it's still obviously very strong. Unless for some reason that isn't true and people won't play Warmongers, then get your chains out. Briar, I think, has had a pretty significant hit. I think that's pretty solidly not in the top tier of decks now, and I think Viz is still vying to be the best deck in the format, in my view.
Actually, to your point about who's going to play Warmongers now, who is going to play Warmongers now? Like, can you actually just bring Chain? Because like, if everyone thinks Chain is dead and they cut their Warmongers, because what else would you play Warmongers into? I don't think Warmongers are very good into Viserai, for example. Like, I just feel like you're just flipping a coin. Dash.io, I suppose. It's still good into Dash.io when they have processors out. So maybe it still warrants for having all 3 of them. And you're just insulated if someone decides to bring Chain, I suppose.
I mean,
but I wonder if there's...
still good against Briar, if you think people might play some mana Briar. And also, it is still good against Viserai. It's not great against Viserai, but in terms of if you're an aggressive deck that goes bang, 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 end on Warmongers, and they're like, right, I needed to kill you this turn. I can now no longer kill you. I'm in some real trouble here. Like, that's kind of the use case for it. If that's good enough, which I think it might be for some decks, then I think people are still playing Warmongers.
Okay.
Can we quickly talk about a 4th Rune Blade?
Yeah, Vincent. I'm kidding, obviously. Yes, you want to talk about Aurora.
I want to talk about Aurora. Does Aurora get like quite a significant buff out of this and become potentially like better than Briar and Chain and is like the aggressive. So Viscera is the combo Runeblade. Is Aurora like the go-to aggro Runeblade now?
I think the question for me would be if Viscerai's aggro tempo game plan got affected enough by the Dirge restriction. It depends on what they can find to replace it. Because I think Viscerai already also was somehow like an aggro Runeblade, right? Like he's still very, very efficient in aggro. Maybe not quite Aurora level, but
less so now.
Still
though.
Very, very strong. Yeah. Well, yeah. So exactly. So that's my question. Like, how much less is it now? If it is like significantly less, then yeah, I could see Aurora being there because then I could see Aurora's spot being she's more aggressive than Viscerai. She also has a combo though, so like she sort of is also a little bit of combo Runeblade, but not Viscerai's level of combos. So it's like if you take Viscerai as say he's aggressive to a certain extent and then combo to a certain extent. Aurora would be more aggressive than that, but less combo-esque than that, which could be a unique position, unique angle to be in.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I just thought it was worth talking, like sort of at least raising the question of does Aurora potentially take that spot? I mean, Aurora's powerful. Like it's the fastest hero to ever hit Living Legend, right? I think it's actually faster than Starvo.
I don't think so. I think Starvo was
Starvo's
faster.
still faster. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Second fastest.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because Aurora came out during Rosetta season. And she survived until the release of Hunted, and Starvo did not survive the release of, Starvo came out Everfest, and he did not survive until the release of Uprising, right? So just like based on that.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so pretty close. Do you want to talk about
Starvo? Do I want to talk about Starvo? Yeah, I mean, I think, I think he got a big buff. I think Viscerai was a bad matchup for him, and Viscerai got nerfed. I think one problem Starvo had into Vis was that they sort of had to be prepared if Vis decides to just full stack them. But then also need to be able to deal with Viscerai's just like tempo-y mini combo type stuff. And I think that's gotten easier for Starvo with the loss of Dirge, because now I think Viscerai needs to be a little bit more defined in what they're trying to do. I think previously the strength they had was how flexible they could be. They could have the turns where they could have games even where they're like, oh, my hands line up in a certain way where I'm just making 15 rune chants and then skeleting you. And in other games where it's like I'm just playing a normal game, a normal tempo game, somewhere in the middle I'll do a skeleton just off of 8 rune chants, for example. And I think that gets effective for Viscerai, the flexibility. And so they need to maybe perhaps have a bit more of a defined game plan, which allows Starvo to actually potentially find a way to beat it. Because if Viscerai just wants to do a stack game plan, like Starvo has a very real answer in the form of Smack of Reality. Right, the tower card which destroys all the rune chants. So it has a very real answer there. So if Viscerai wants to go lean hard into that with the Blessing of Occult Sonata Galaxia stuff, then Starvo has an answer. But if Viscerai wants to go into the more tempo-y stuff, well, Starvo does have ice cards and stuff, right? They might need to change the game plan and figure out a way to beat that as well. But I think they could. So yeah, I think Starvo gets a win from these bans.
I think I'm kind of feeling like Starvo is netting out, and I'll explain why. I think I agree with all the things you just said, right? But I think it lost a good matchup for it in RuneGate Chain. I think that was a good matchup for Starvo. So I think that hurts a little bit that one of your better matchups is gone in Viscerai, which is not such a great matchup. Although it had a small nerf, like we spoke about, is still around. And to your point, maybe it becomes more targetable for Starvo, which is great. The other thing I think that potentially with RuneGate Chain getting a big hit and also Briar getting a big hit is that I think there's some other decks on the fringe that might be more playable, and I don't necessarily know if that's good for Starvo either. So I actually think all things considered, Starvo might actually be like a slight downgrade here, which is maybe why they didn't touch it, because I was wondering, should they have touched? When I first saw it, I was like, wow, they didn't touch Starvo, but they've just gutted Runeblade. The more I thought about it, I was like, actually, I think this kind of makes sense, because I think Starvo almost gets hurt by this ban as well.
I could see that, actually. I know, and I think, let's start talking about some fringe decks. But actually, real quick, regarding the targetability of Viscerai, I think one other aspect of the matchup, and actually any ice deck into Viscerai now, Hypothermia, if the Viscerai is saying they want to do the tempo sort of game plan, actually is now quite a bit more significant, because previously you hypothermia them and they just dirge away the hypothermia.
Yeah.
Or they become the Arcanine, find the dirge and dirge it away. Now with only one dirge in the deck,
I can't do that.
Either you've already seen the dirge, or it's just a lot less likely that they can play around that hypothermia now. They could, maybe they need to take in like Condemn to Slaughter or something to deal with that hypothermia, but I think on that front as well, like when we talk about Star Wars targetability, it feels like the tools they have into Viscerai's tempo game plan, now hypothermia is a lot more real. And in Viscerai's combo game plan, well, you have your smack of reality thing. So, yeah, Starvo got buffed on that front, but I'm with you on that. Maybe some of the fringe decks which can benefit from Viscerai getting hit are bad for Starvo. So let's go ahead and start talking about that. I kind of want to start with Nu, if that's okay with you, because if you tell me Starvo got better and you want something that targets Starvo, the first place I'm going to start is Nu.
Well, I didn't tell you Starvo got better. I didn't tell you. You're saying that. You're the one coping on that for you. Could I just one last thing I want to add on that when you spoke about the Dirge piece is I actually also think that's a bit of a potential buff for something like Ranger as well, right? Like not being able to just Dirge away some of these negative infliction auras. I think it is potentially relevant. But yes, go pop off on Nu. Where you go.
Well, if you haven't played that matchup before, any of the listeners, it's kind of miserable on the Starvo side.
It's
because
so bad.
it feels really difficult to get a fuse off. Siren's Call's obviously a house. The mask activation's a house. Everything's a house. They send a Bonds of Agony at you. You just kind of cry. I had that card. Like, both sending and being on the receiving end of the card, I'm kind of like, wow, this card really was legal in CC for a long time, huh? So it is very strong. And then, ultimately, as well, they do have access to your blues, because they also have that endgame. So, if you're of the opinion that Starvo got quite a big win from these bans, I think Nu is a place to start. Also, because Nu's Viscerai matchup, we spoke about this last week, Nu needed to solve the Viscerai matchup if you wanted to play Nu, and Viscerai did get nerfed, which, in my opinion, is also good for Nu. So, not looking at other decks so far, if you look at the Viscerai and Starvo, Viscerai getting hit, Starvo potentially getting better, I think both these things are good for Nu.
Okay, I can see it. No, I mean, having played the new Starvo matchup as on the Starvo side, it is actually so miserable. Yeah. The deck I'd like to go to is Kano, to be honest. I wonder now with Runegate Chain in particular being down the pecking order, and Briar as well, where they can be this super aggressive deck that also can easily play Spell Void 2 gloves. Yes, Starvo's still around, has access to Spell Void 2 gloves, but the Kano is really powerful in Living Legend in terms of like the amount of damage it can output and actually blow through SV2. I really wonder if I think Kano's gotten a big buff here. And I think Viscerai is a good matchup for you. Especially if they've got 2 less Dirges, which slows them down a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, unique to the other Runeblades, actually, Viscerai is the only one that doesn't have easy access to Spell Void or like just prevention on the equipment. Like Chain has the Shadow Pieces, Briar has Shock Charmers, Aurora has Shock Charmers. Viscerai doesn't. Viscerai has
Tiara.
Amethyst Tiara, yeah. I suppose, but I don't think they're going to be trying to set up a bunch of rune chants onto you as anyway if you're Kano. And if they do, I actually think you're probably better off.
I think it's fine. I feel like you just combo twice.
Exactly, you have the better combo. Also, like they have to send a rune chance at you at some point, right? And then you just, kill them. So yeah, I could see Kano. I think the Starvo piece is still quite tough. Shock Charmers is the house. I think the thing on that front is that I think it's a very small ask on the Starvo side to just put Shock Charmers in the 80. It's not as big as like, sometimes we've seen tech for Kano in the past be like, you need to have 3 Oasis in your deck or something like that. It's one piece and it's a starts in place, stay in place, so it has a very strong impact in the matchup as opposed to like having an Oasis or 2 where you also need to hope you draw it sort of thing. It's a very small ask for Starvo, and I think if Starvo is still prominent, which I think we can expect him to be, I'm still a little bit nervous about bringing Kano, but I mean, I'm with you. I do think he got a buff, particularly with Chain going away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. The last one I had on my list was Dromai, but I think it's going to extend to Illusionists in general, and I think Runegate Chain, Briar being nerfed, Viscerai is... I wouldn't say it was good for Dromai, but the big part of that was Rosetta Thorn, and Rosetta Thorn was terrifying as Dromai, and Rosetta Thorn doesn't exist in this format now.
You say you don't think it was good for Dromai. I'm going to go a little harder than that and say it was miserable for Dromai. I think the Viscerai Dromai matchup
was pretty bad. But
really bad.
A big part of that was Rosetta Thorn. A big part of that was Rosetta Thorn.
Yes, I agree. I think it got better for Dromai. I still think it's in the realm of pretty bad. Maybe it went from miserable to pretty bad, I think. Still, just because Rune Chance, man. This Troma just does not deal with Rune Chance. And Visra it's very easy for him to just send a bunch of Rune Chance at you.
Yeah.
Over the course of like 4 or 5 turns. And then there's also the Skeletor in the middle. And already, I feel like Dromai Starvo matchup is... Like, I would give the edge to Dromai probably, but it's not by a lot. So I'm still curious what Dromai's like solid angle is in draw format. Because I still don't think you want to play against Viscerai. And we speak about, Chain and Briars have gone down and Rosetta's away, but I think Chain and Briars going away just means that the people who are going to play Chain or Briar are going to move to Viscerai. So there's going to be like more Viscerai. Like, I'm not sure whether the quantity of Runeblade changes, which was, to your point at the beginning of the section, where the texture of the format still seems fairly similar.
Yeah.
So it just feels like instead of 3 Runeblades, you're going to have just Viscerais, but the total number of Runeblades is still the same, and that's still not good for Dromai. And if your Starvo matchup isn't fully convincing, it's kind of like, what's the angle?
Maybe Aurora. Maybe you get Aurora. I think that's very fair. The last one I'll throw out on that is just Prism. Like, Viscerai without Rosetta Thorn is a much better prospect for OG Prism, I think, and could be something that it comes to consideration. Starvo matchup, I think, is still unfavored, but it's not terrible for you. So I think Prism we might also see, and also if things like I imagine if things like Nu and stuff are showing up, that's got to be fantastic for Prism and Wizard, of course, as well. So I actually think Prism, this, as much as I was maybe doom and gloom about the format just looking the same and things like that, I think there's a prospect. There's a chance that it changes enough that yes, Starvo and Viscerai are the 2 most played decks at PT, but that Nu, that Kano, that Prism are real decks that get played in decent quantity.
Yeah, and I mean, if Dromai does become more playable, that's also really bad for Nu. Like, oh my god, like Nu Dromai match. I don't even want to think about it. It just does not sound good on the Nu side at all. I do want to touch a little bit of a hero that I was high on the past couple of weeks when we were discussing LL, who I actually think got a hit, despite already not being top tier, and that's Zen. I think Zen's angle into the format was solid into Viscerai, and then you are not great in a Starvo, but you do get to play, and if they whiff Disruption on the wrong turn, they just get blown up, which is like what Zen can do. But with Vis getting hit, and Starvo potentially rising up because of it, I think he did take a small hit in that form. But, I mean, if people want to start playing Illusionist, I mean, you can play a Ninja into that, right?
Yeah, definitely can. Cool. Anything else you want to talk about Living Legend? I mean, 2 weeks' time, we'll know exactly how this shakes out. But I think we've done a reasonably good job of at least thinking about what might happen next and how people will start to look at this format over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think the Viscerai getting hit in particular does open up the format a little bit more. So I am a little bit optimistic about, like we're both on the same page about, yes, the texture of the format still feels fairly similar when Blade and Starvo are still at the top. But I do think it's opened up slightly with kind of the only Runeblade now being Viscerai and sort of like 3 different flavors of them.
Yeah.
And that Runeblade also getting nerfed. So I think it's potentially opened up a little bit. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what people come up with.
Perfect. All right. Well, if there's nothing more to add, next week on the pod, we will be doing not our Pro Tour preview. I think that'll be the following week. So next week, we will be sort of recapping, though. I guess it'll be a bit of a 2-parter of the preview, because next week we will have, of course, calling Sydney. We'll have the Battle Hards this coming week, and we'll have our last chunk of data on this Classic Constructor format. So we're definitely going to be talking a good amount about this Classic Constructor format and starting to highlight towards Worlds very, very keenly. And I guess, it's just crazy. It's 2 weeks away. If you're around this weekend, make sure to tune into calling coverage for Sydney. You'll be seeing my face. So maybe you're sick of that and you don't want to tune into it, but just put it on mute. Still watch it. It's fine. And if you're in the Pacific Northwest playing Flesh and Blood this weekend, make sure you say hello to Pankaj.
Mm-hmm. No one can get sick of your face, Hayden. But yes,
or voice.
Worlds is 2 weeks away, which is insane to think about, and honestly just comes back to the fact that, can you imagine that the original BNR announcement was supposed to happen next week, and Worlds is like I guess it's 3 weeks away. So Pog. That we got. Just gonna reiterate that. Yeah.
Agree. Cool. Well, until next week's episode, this has been episode 237 of Arsenal Pass. We will see you next episode.